All right, welcome back to the Gateway Defense Podcast, everybody. As always, I'm your host, Brennan Brennick. With me, of course, is my co-host, Justin Anderson. We are a company called Gateway Defense. We're traveling the country teaching people what we know about performance shooting. And when we aren't doing that, we're trying to make YouTube videos for you guys. And part of that is also this podcast right here. So today we are going to be talking about a bunch of different things, kind of surrounding the topic of concealed carry. I'm really excited about this one. Joining us in the discussion today is Tessah Booth. Tessa, welcome to the show.
Thanks. So my kind of like background in the concealed carry space, I grew up with like guns in my household. Not really a part of my life until I got married in 2018. My husband had been competitively shooting really regularly for the years, prior to us getting married. He really wanted me to get into concealed carry. I was all about not interested in that at all until, there was a mass shooting in our local area. And I decided, this is not really something that I feel like I have a choice anymore. It's something I feel like I actually have to do so that I can, come home every day. So I started carrying back in 2020. Started taking it more seriously at the end of 2020, taking classes, and, encountered the difficulties of concealment as a little lady myself. Carrying a gun can be really difficult. So concealment became a really important topic for me, really dove into that, started sharing about it on my social media, my YouTube channel, and then eventually actually got hired by Filster Holsters to be their director of customer development. So I make a lot of their educational material. I run their YouTube channel. So right now, I pretty much live and breathe talking about the ins and outs of concealment, concealed carry. I also am a little B-class shooter in USPSA. And that's pretty much all I can think about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm excited about picking your brain on some stuff, and I think this will be a really beneficial conversation for everybody who is tuning in. So, I think so we're kind of going to jump around a bit, kind of like the last podcast episode. If you guys watched that one with Matt Adams, kind of jump around this topic because it's a huge topic and there's a bunch of little kind of sub sections of this that I want to explore. But obviously there are some things that I think you are really passionate about, Tessa. I know I've been following your journey kind of for, well, a long time. I think maybe right after you started posting on Instagram, honestly, back pre-COVID, I think. So obviously lots of things have changed. Everybody's journey is a little bit different with concealment. Like it's very specific to everybody. So I think what we'll do is I've kind of got a little list of things. I want to talk about, just kind of jumping right into it. Let's talk about gear selection a little bit. Maybe even before we get to that, well, maybe as part of that, we could talk about like what you actually carry, what you're using, because that'll maybe help us give some context. But let's talk about the topic of gear selection, because I think from a new concealed carrier's perspective, the idea of like, what do I need to get, right? Like I'm going to carry a gun. What am I going to do? Am I going to like stick it in a pocket, or like what is going to go on, right? And then they start to research that, and there's like just so much stuff that people say you have to have. So how do you think we should tackle this with kind of gear selection? Because it is super important, I think.
It's such a broad topic, even after we narrow it down to like specifically concealed carry. We're not talking about open carry. We're not talking about like duty carry. We're talking about concealed carry.
Right.
It's even still is a really broad topic. So, I mean, honestly, first and foremost, it's really important to understand what makes a safe product. And then, from there, we figure out what's safe and then what actually works. So like, what is actually going to allow me to conceal this firearm? And then what's also the definition of concealed, because it can be really subjective. I'm not sure how in depth you want to get into each of those things.
Let's jump into all of those. That's great. Maybe start with the definition of concealed, because I think this is a very good one that is actually contextual for a lot of people, and people don't realize that.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm not going to define this perfectly, but I am going to steal generally John Houtman's definition of concealment, because I think it's really accurate. So, a concealed firearm is generally undetectable to the eye. But we do have some, social norms that we all kind of operate in, right? Like we're driving down the road. We don't expect that the person in the oncoming lane is going to just swerve into our lane. And that's why we can drive a car, right?
Right.
So when it comes to social norms as it pertains to concealing a firearm, generally when you look at someone, you can only look at them for a certain amount of time before you're violating social norms.
Mm.
Generally when someone's looking at you or you're looking at someone and they realize that you're looking at them, you look away because
Yeah.
that's our social norms here, especially in the US of A. So concealed is, can somebody look at you within that social norm amount of time and detect something unusual about you? It doesn't need to be,
Mhm.
oh, I see that there's a gun there. It's just there's like a corner where there should be a curve on that person's waistband or side, or maybe their belt sticks out in a weird place where it's not supposed to, or I see something below the belt that doesn't look organically shaped, and they can detect that by looking at you within that social norm. Then they can do that look away, and if there's a detection of something, they'll look back. So what we're trying to avoid is that double take.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the broad um, definition of concealment, as I understand it, is looking at someone within that social norm and not detecting something. Hopefully, you can't hear my dog barking right now.
Oh no, that's fine. We love dogs here. So, yeah, I think that's great. What do we do about the people who say like concealment doesn't matter that much? Nobody's really noticing, because there's a lot of truth to that, right? Like I've certainly had days where like my concealment wasn't really doing me any favors, right? Because I like wore a shirt and I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to wear this shirt again, but it
Mhm.
was uncomfortable because I knew there like I was printing a little bit or whatever.
Right.
Um, what do we do about those people? Because
Yeah,
again, yeah, I think that is pretty contextual for some people, like depending on what you do.
absolutely. Yeah. So I get to have conversations with those guys on a pretty regular basis in the comment section in my DMs, because it's a topic I talk about a lot.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with you that it's contextual. You have people that concealment really is not as big of a deal for them. Maybe they live in a more rural area. Maybe they're not going into environments where they're encountering new people on any kind of regular basis. They already know that their community is highly accepting of that type of behavior. So maybe in their context, it doesn't matter as much as it does for someone like myself. Uh, so yes, it doesn't necessarily matter the same amount to every single person, but I think as a broad sweeping printing does matter, concealment does matter, because there can be negative outcomes for it, like losing your job. Maybe you're carrying in a non-permissive environment like that. I know of people personally who have kind of torpedoed their career because they were. When they got their job, they were in a permissive environment. It was okay to be carrying a firearm, and then policy changed, and they asked him to come into the office and show them his waistband, and he was removed from employment that day. So
Wow.
there's really negative outcomes to printing for certain people. For
Yeah.
me, I believe my negative outcome is that I can't change my appearance. I am a 5 foot, 100 pound female. I can't change that about myself, other than like weightlifting and stuff. But I can walk with confidence. I can have situational awareness, but to the naked eye, I can look like an easy target.
Sure.
And there's a whole category of people out there that are the reason I carry a gun, as a matter of fact, that look at 100 pound female and they see a gun and they don't think, "Ooh, I'm not going to mess with her." They
Mm.
think that right there is a free gun. I can take that. That's my gun here in just a minute. So, for me personally, printing is really a big deal because it can actually be the reason somebody picks me, and
Yeah.
there's evidence for that. There's evidence of that being caught on video where somebody was not planning to necessarily take a gun that day, but sometimes people are opportunists, and if they see the opportunity, they'll take it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it definitely depends on the person. It depends on their environment and the people they're spending time around, but To those who kind of don't think that it matters, the argument I regularly hear is everyone's in their phones these days. Nobody's paying attention. And I completely agree with that. No, a lot of people are not paying attention. We should pay more attention. But I'm not worried about those people, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
I'm not worried about the people that are in their phones. I'm worried about the person that's looking for me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting discussion, right? Because there are a very large amount of people, especially within this industry, that say, you should be carrying in places that you shouldn't, right? Places of business, places of employment where there's signs or whatever it may be. And people will say with full confidence, carry everywhere. Like, ignore all the signs, ignore the laws, just carry everywhere. But then in the same conversation, they'll be like, well, concealment doesn't really matter. People aren't looking at you anyway. It's like, well, I feel like you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot at that point, because like totally defeats the purpose. So this is an interesting topic.
I do think too that and this is not a rule, but I do think that a lot of the time when people do say concealment doesn't matter, or even it doesn't matter as much as maybe someone like myself would say it does, it's kind of I'm trying to think about like the best way to put it. Oftentimes when people are saying that, they're saying it because they got to a place in their concealed carry journey where they realize that concealing is actually really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really difficult. And they came to a point where they could not improve their concealment any further. And so instead of, continuing and really trying to refine that concealment skill, it came to a place where they decided, you know what, I'm just going to have to be okay with the fact that I'm not concealing very well. And therefore, I've never experienced negative outcomes from this. So I would say it doesn't really matter that much. So, you kind of get to that place of concealment doesn't matter from a couple of different avenues. But I think that's a pretty commonplace one where, concealment becomes really challenging for some people, and they decide it just doesn't matter that much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting, right? I feel like I see both sides of the coin very well, right? Because I used to have a job where, that was definitely not okay at all, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And like it was in their policy, and they had security at the building, which was unarmed, like people who probably couldn't get a job anywhere else. I mean, did not pay attention to anything. You could have probably walked into the building with a rifle. They wouldn't even notice. It was kind of a joke. And so I was like, well, like I'm definitely going to carry here. And it was in kind of a slightly sketchy area of town with a lot of foot traffic. And like there was a bomb threat one day. We all had to evacuate the building, just like little things like that. And it was like, yeah, I'm definitely going to carry here. And it wasn't a job that like I trained for or went to school for, but it was still the way that I provided for my family. Right. And it was like definitely not okay to have a gun or be seen with a gun. And we all worked in very close proximity with each other. So during that time, I put a lot of effort into my concealment, and that's actually kind of where I learned to conceal really well, I would say. And then like I went from that job to a job where I worked by myself as a locksmith, and it wasn't as big of a deal. And then I moved to a job where I was working for a major optics manufacturer as a firearms instructor. And so we would literally actually walk into the building with an AR-15 in our hands. And the first thing I would do is I would take off my concealed holster. I'd set it on the desk next to me, next to my computer. And we all did that. And so for me, like under that context, going from my house to work to back, like literally my concealment did not matter at all until I went into some other public place. So for some people, it might not matter for you, but for the people who, for those people who it does matter, it matters a lot. So I think that's a good discussion to have. So I think that leads us then into like what kind of gear can we start narrowing things down for people to shop for? Are there things that people can look for in a holster? Because a lot of people who are really hesitant about concealed carry are really worried about being detected. I would say for me, in my personally, of my friends who are interested in it, that's like a really big concern for them. Like they do not want to be detected. So the gear matters. And maybe they tried one holster before and it was like not it. Right. So how would we maybe direct people towards some stuff that would be a good jumping off point?
Yeah. So I love this question because people love to talk about gear. Like gear is so much fun. I've turned into a little bit of a gearhead in this specific category, but I think it's skills, not gear. I actually I shouldn't say skills, not gear. I should say skills come before gear because it makes it really hard to pick good gear without an understanding of how concealment works. But also, once you get that gear, you don't know how to use it very well. It's the same thing as picking a gun. Like you walk into the gun store and you don't know anything about guns at all, and the only thing you have to go off of is like, well, how does it feel in my hand? Does it make me feel this spiritual experience? It's like, well, that's really not the priority. Like maybe like try a couple of them. Maybe like take a basic, firearms course before you go pick your first gun ever. Like get a couple of, just a little bit of understanding, basic knowledge before you go buy a gun. Right. I think it's the same thing when it comes to holsters too. So just some basic skills that are good to know. So we talked a little bit about concealment mechanics and then concealment features. Concealment features will help us pick good gear. Concealment mechanics will teach us how to use it. So some general kind of concealment mechanics and ideas. The way that we conceal a firearm is getting it close to our body. We want to take an inorganic shape and put it onto the organic shape that is our body and make it disappear. And it is, and I'm going to steal this again from John Howman. It is like fitting a prosthetic. You're taking that inorganic shape and putting it on your body. So we want to get the grip in close to our body. The grip is typically one of the most difficult parts to conceal, as well as, your optic or your rear sight. Those are typically the areas of the gun that want to print the most. So we can bring those in. We want to bring those in closer to our body. And the way that we do that, well, I guess another kind of concealment mechanic is knowing how to dress while carrying a firearm. You don't necessarily have to wear a fishing vest or a sweatshirt or things like that to conceal a firearm. So long as you select a firearm that is a reasonable size for your body size. So your body size in relation to the size of the gun does matter. But yeah, so we want to get the gun in nice and close to our body. We want to understand how to dress with it. And the way that we bring the gun in close to our body is we use, I have no idea why that's happening. I didn't even touch my screen.
That's okay. So I'll explain. So apparently you're filming on a Mac, I would assume.
Yeah.
So apparently Apple did this update where if you do certain hand gestures, it does little animations on the screen. And apparently this is fireworks sometimes.
Or a thumbs up is a thumbs up in like little. Oh yeah, there we go.
It's very fun.
Wow.
Not a problem. If you go to, this is just free tip for anyone who does this on video calls on Macs. If you go up to your little FaceTime camera on the top little toolbar and click that and then uncheck the reactions, it will not do that for you anymore.
Wow, that's so easy fix.
We did a podcast with Brian Valise and he was talking about low light training and he kept holding his like an imaginary flashlight like this and it just did a million little thumbs up bubbles and I was like, what is going on? Anyways, not to completely derail the conversation.
No, yeah, we were talking about concealment mechanics and concealment principles. So, and I was doing a long run-on sentence, so I'm glad that thing cut me off.
Not a problem.
So, so concealment, not concealment mechanics, but like concealment features. So we're talking about holster wings, we're talking about belts and belt pressure, and we're talking about using wedges. It's really kind of difficult. It can be difficult to explain this stuff without visuals. So I'm not going to get too in detail, just because it's a lot of, it's just it's really difficult to explain without actually showing you. But yeah, a wing is going to, well, I have this stuff here. I just figured we're on a podcast. So.
Yeah, no, grab it. It's a video podcast. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so you want to use this is a blue gun. You're gonna have a wing on this side of the gun.
Yep.
And the wing is going to help you bring this part of the gun in closer to your body. And then a wedge, say, this is the body side of the holster. The wedge is going to go, it's like a foam material. You can use like a Dr. Scholl's heel insert. You can use a sock, like whatever you have laying around to just try using a wedge. You want to place a wedge at the bottom of your holster. You place it up, if it starts creeping up into the trigger guard area or much higher, what's going to ultimately end up happening is the entire gun is going to move away from your body. You're going to have it just a bulge on your belt line. So you want to put your wedge on the bottom of the holster, and that's going to tip the top part of the gun, the rear sight and the top of the grip into your body. And if you're having more issues with grip printing, you want to place your wedge on the slide side of the gun. If you're having more issues with slide printing or rear sight printing, you want to place the wedge either centered or onto the grip side of your holster. So those are just some kind of basic concealment tools, but none of them work if you do not have proper pressure coming from a Enigma like product or a just typical belt. That's a mistake that I think especially a lot of ladies make, is they use something like a fabric clip or even like a DCC clip, and they just attach it to their pants.
I see that a lot.
Yeah, no, it's really common because I'm not really sure. I think that ladies don't wear a belt for a number of reasons. One, because like belts are uncomfortable. And two, because typically the way that women's bodies are shaped generally, we have wider hips and like narrower waists.
Yes.
And so we don't need to wear a belt to hold our pants up. We also wear pants that are tighter than men typically wear. Right. So we actually don't have a utilitarian use for a belt, whereas men are shaped a little bit more boxy. And typically, from the waist down, it gets narrower.
That's a great point. Like, I'm really glad that you bring that up because, like, when you tell people, which I'm sure we'll talk about the Enigma at some point, but when you tell like especially ladies that it's like, well, all holsters that look like this have to work with a belt, but like this is a holster that has great concealment features. It works really well. I've been able to dial it in for me, but you have to have a great belt to go with it. It's like, well, for people who don't wear belts, then this is like useless. For like my friends, who are like, well, all I do is wear yoga pants. It's like, well, you're not really going to throw on a blue alpha belt or something like that. It's just not going to work for you. Because you're exactly right. Women are created to be different shaped, and pants don't sit on us the exact same. So it's a really good point.
And we can wear belts. So when I first started carrying, I encountered some unsafe products that were recommended to me by other women. And I didn't know any better. So I used them and then discovered like, oh, this is actually like really unsafe. So I guess I'm just going to have to, do the thing that the dudes do and get a Blue Alpha belt, which are good belts. Get a Blue Alpha belt, get a holster that, has a magazine attachment on it. That was my first like Kinetics holster because I just wanted to be safe. Like I just wanted to have a gun with me. I wanted to know that I was safe carrying it. And that was the only way that I understood how to do that. And so, yes, us ladies can wear belts. But ladies typically tend to not wear belts because there's not a utilitarian reason for us to need them. And so when we're like, okay, we're going to start carrying a gun, now all of a sudden we have to wear a belt that is actually pretty uncomfortable. And in my case, anytime I wear a belt, including my competition belt, I get really bad lower back pain. And I can't carry for very long. So that was one of the problems I encountered carrying in that way, which, by some people's opinions is the only right way to do it. I started carrying that way, and I would have so much back pain. I would only carry my gun for a couple hours a day. So you need belt pressure in order to activate those concealment features. If you just set it in your pants with some type of clip, there's a couple of negative outcomes from that, but one of them is poor concealment. You'll get ladies and even gents saying like, I look like I'm pregnant. Like, why is this all like sitting so far away from my body? And it's partially because you don't have anything actually pressing it into your body.
Yeah.
So yeah, concealment features only work with some type of pressure going into them.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So I'm glad you brought up concealment mechanics because I think that is something that is like so for those of you who don't know, Filster published like a booklet or like a PDF on concealment mechanics and stuff, and I would recommend you look that up. I believe it's on their website. Super helpful to figure out how to conceal, maybe where to wear your gun, what types of things to look for in a good holster, like all the stuff that we've been discussing. Highly recommend like downloading that and taking a look at it. When I taught some concealed carry classes at my previous job, I actually messaged John and was like, hey, I would like to print this off and hand it to every student who walks in the door just so they have a great reference when they leave here and go to shop for holsters. He was like, 100% do that. Like, that's great. Let me know how I can help with that. So I would print that off, however many pages it was quite a few, and would just hand this little booklet to people as they came through the door, and super helpful for folks. So if you're interested in kind of diving into that more, for those of you who are listening, definitely go check out the Filster website. There's a bunch of educational content that Tessa does a lot of, and there should be a PDF link there. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly where to navigate on the website to find that exact download link. I would start in the Learn tab because that's kind of where we've manufactured all that learning content. And one thing I'll say is all of the learning content that Filster makes is completely free.
Which is
and
awesome.
it's not for only customers. And that was designed on purpose. Like we want to better the community as a whole. And the way that we do that is just by like teaching everyone how to do it well. You don't need to use Filster products to do it. So if you already have a holster that you're kind of struggling with, we're teaching mechanics and principles. They apply to all body types, and there are certain holsters that are much more conducive to getting good concealment, but you can at the very least use what you have, so long as it's kind of generally shaped like a typical Kinetics holster. You can use all of those concealment mechanics, use all of that learning material to find your body's concealment sweet spot, and to learn how to use wings and wedges, and how much belt pressure to apply, and navigate even the ins and outs of your discomfort issues. Sarah made an outstanding video, I think like almost 2 years ago now, that it is just a deep dive into all of the various discomfort issues that people have. She addresses each and every one and how to solve them. And even I have gained a lot from just kind of understanding even just like how our skin works and how our skin can actually become damaged from carrying a gun every single day, and how to prevent that and how to treat that when that happens. It's just, so all of that information is completely free. And if you're a firearms instructor like yourself, Brennan, and you want to provide that information to your students, I know for sure that Filster has a full-on slideshow that is their concealment tune-up class that I actually got to go to this weekend.
Cool.
It's completely free to the public. Like you can teach off of our PowerPoint and everything. So yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic. Cool. I will try to at least link to the e-learning page from the Filster website in the show notes for people. I think that's a really good resource. So before I want to talk about some more considerations with concealed carry. Before we get into that, could you share with us what you are carrying these days? Because you mentioned you had started with like a sidecar style holster with like a belt, maybe some other more unsafe types of holsters before that.
Yeah.
How has that progressed into like, what are you doing now?
Yeah. So do you want me to just dive into what I'm doing now or how I got there?
Yeah, let's do how you got there, kind of the gear journey.
So I'll share the first couple really quick. I think my first ever holster was a Concealment belly band. And I got that in. I never actually used it. I put the thing on and I was like, this is a holster? And I, unloaded my gun, made sure it was empty and put it in the holster. I was like, I feel like I could probably pull the trigger through this. Sure enough, I absolutely could. So that was a instant nope for me. It did not have proper, trigger protection, but it also didn't have any retention to keep the gun in the holster. And then furthermore, it didn't have any retention to keep the holster on my body. So I would start moving or doing things and the entire belly band would just come up, which reduces the amount of like tension on the gun, which basically just makes the gun fall out. So it
awesome.
yeah, super great. Yeah, love that. So that was my first holster, never actually used it, at least not in its true form. And then I think my next holster was a sticky holster. So sticky holsters are a little bit of a nuanced topic because they were initially designed for pocket carry. Pocket carry is not something that I am highly knowledgeable in. All of my, concealment knowledge and carry knowledge is based off of inside the waistband carry, and primarily appendix carry. But, what I know from other people who do know things about pocket carry and do it well and responsibly, the sticky holster can be a usable solution for the knowledgeable pocket carrier.
Yeah.
But it is being marketed as an inside the waistband carry option, which is so there's a couple of reasons it does not follow proper holster safety requirements. One of them is that there's nothing that actually secures it to the belt. It's also a universal like nylon style holster. So it's not actually molded to anything like the light or the gun. And so there's not actually the only retention you're getting from a sticky holster is like pressure tension between your body and the belt or your pants, which is a part of inside the waistband retention, whether you're using a Kinetics holster or a sticky holster. That is a piece of it, but your body changes dimensions throughout the day. You start the day like nice and lean, and then you have your first meal and you get a little bit, like your belt notches out a little bit more. And, you go to the bathroom and you get smaller and then you sit down and stand up. Your body's constantly changing. So you can't rely on pressure as it's not a reliable form of retention. So long story short, sticky holster was out. And then my next holster was a tier 1 concealed Axis Slim. My husband had been carrying in that for probably a year at that point. And I just was sick and tired of finding unsafe holsters. So I was like, just order me whatever you're using. And I'm just going to do that. That was for my Glock 42, which was my first carry gun, outstanding first carry gun. I hope we get into talking a little bit more about like concealed carry gun selection.
Yeah, we definitely will.
Yeah. So I used the Axis Slim for, I think, about a year. I used it in a couple of different configurations, whether it was on a belt or using like DCC clips on my pants. I used a couple of different like wing sizes with it. And I even took the magazine carrier off at one point and carried it kind of alone. I recommended it for a really long time. And then basically what I started having issues with was, just general concealment. I was just kind of getting some printing from the top of the gun that I couldn't really figure out how to solve without creating other concealment problems like below the belt printing. So
did you add a big wedge and then that solved the top, but
basically, yeah. And that's pretty common for people. Like it's literally a teeter totter on your body and you have to figure out where the perfect teeter totter settings are for your organic shape. But ladies have a specific struggle with wedges because men's pants are naturally fit a little bit looser in that vicinity, and ladies' pants don't. A lot of ladies wear yoga pants, or even our jeans fit really tight. So really putting more than a gun below the belt line is going to cause below the belt printing, and the only way to combat that is to not use a wedge or to wear a longer shirt that covers that portion of your pants.
Right.
So yeah, the other issue I had with the Access Slim was that I eventually decided I didn't want to carry a spare magazine anymore. I wanted to swap that out for carrying a handheld light. I don't have a lot of real estate for carrying things, so it was this or that, and the light seemed much more important to me than a spare magazine.
For sure.
The last thing was just that I wanted to wear girlier clothes. I wanted to wear dresses and skirts, and I just couldn't really find a good way to do that with that holster. And I actually ended up using my little can belly band as an inner belt and attached my tier 1 holster to that. So I kind of found ways around it. It worked okay, but it was painful to carry that way. It was too much pressure on my body. And I was looking for a solution, and that was actually when Filster started like teasing the Enigma. They weren't showing anyone what it looked like. They just started talking about it. And I saw Sarah Houtman on the range in yoga pants, running back and forth, drawing and holstering. Again, not knowing what she was using, but I was like, that looks like the solutions to all my problems. She's concealing well. She's wearing clothes like I want to wear. And she's also performing on the range. Like, what is this thing? So I actually messaged John Houtman, never talked to him before. And I just like cold messaged him and was like, whatever this product is that you're talking about, I want to buy it right now. Like, it hadn't launched yet. Please let me buy this. And he actually was like, you know what? I'll just send it to you. So I got one of the first Enigmas. It was a terribly frustrating product at first. There was no educational information about it. There was no how to assemble this. And I was trying to use it for a Glock 19 with a Pro holster, which is a giant gun on me. And also, like, Filster doesn't recommend the Pro holster for women because it has not only a built-in wedge, but an ambidextrous built-in wedge. So there's a wedge on both sides of the holster.
Yes.
So yeah, the Enigma was a really frustrating product for me at first, but I, over the course of about a year, I just tinkered the heck out of it, customized it literally like a prosthetic for a period of time, and started having really great concealment with it, was able to use it carrying dresses, carrying in shorts, carrying in skirts, carrying in jeans and leggings. I was able to take it to, USPSA matches, all that stuff. So I actually came to that product as a customer and then, start talking about it on my YouTube channel and stuff. And that's when Filster reached out to me and they're like, hey, do you want to do what you're doing right now, but get paid to do it for us? So that's kind of the whole progression there. But so yeah, I carry a SIG P365 with a Holosun 507K. And a custom bore sight grip module. That's kind of my gun that I carry, but I carry that in a Filster Enigma Express with a reduced size buckle, a paracord leg leash, and a sport belt.
Awesome. Very cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
So that's really funny because my wife has been following you, Tessa, for a long time. She loves all your stuff, but it's funny because she's had almost the exact same journey and experiences. She started out with, she kind of skipped the whole belly band thing, but she started out with a tier 1 Axis Elite with the Glock 43X and a Blue Alpha belt, the whole 9 yards. She's like, I just want to do what you're doing. And I was like, okay, great. Yep. And it was all the same issues. She also got pregnant, so then she stopped carrying altogether for a while, and then she got back into it after she had our first, and then it just, thank you, and it was just getting back into it. She was just like, man, this is just not working, and this was actually just about like a year ago, and so that's when she picked up the Enigma, and it was just absolutely life-changing because of all the reasons you talked about with belts and how they fit women, and also the comfort and the back pain and all that kind of stuff. It was the exact experience she had. So that's kind of interesting.
It's interesting that you bring up like her experience with carrying before and after pregnancy. our bodies change a lot throughout our lives, whether we're men or women. We gain and we lose weight. We have injuries. We have all kinds of changes. We get older. We get arthritis. Like we get new pains and aches and all of those things. And so I guess something that is kind of like something worth mentioning is that the thing that works perfectly for you right now may not be the thing that works perfectly for you in 6 months or 2 years or 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's important to mention for the longevity of the concealed carrier, is just that like it's okay to make changes. Like your body's constantly changing. So it's totally okay to make changes to the details of your concealed carry setup, whether that's your gun, your holster, the way you dress, all that.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think the other thing to keep in mind too, and this is something that is just, I don't know, of late, I feel like this has just been so rampant, like on social media, but like you are allowed to change your mind on things, and like, it's okay to have been wrong. It's okay to just have developed a new opinion based on learning and experience. I've been concealed carrying since 2018, and like the first stuff that I did for like the first 6 or 9 months was, I would say, like flat out wrong.
Yep.
And but I had super good intentions and I was trying really hard, and I just didn't have enough experience now. And I feel like I've gone like the whole gamut of concealed carry, trying everything. I've run the Enigma. I've carried like compact guns, full size guns, like the Axis Elites, standalone rigs like this, just kind of everything in between. And I know what works for me in certain contexts, but it doesn't make the other contexts wrong. But also just be willing to understand that you can have been wrong before, and that's okay. And like that's what we're all learning. And like you said, it's super individualistic, right? Like I would imagine, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would imagine your husband was probably concealing with a fair level of success with the tier 1 concealed thing, right?
Yeah.
And maybe he's found something better now, but like then you try it and it's like, it's decent for me, not great. And then you move on and go, yeah, that's definitely not for me. But like, for instance, I've been carrying with that holster for a little over a year now. And it's worked great for me in my context. And I was like the first person to admit, I was like, this does not conceal as well as what I used to run. Like it just doesn't. It's very convenient though. And I was spending, I was teaching 3 to 4 days a week on the range. Maybe half of that was concealed. And it was like, this is honestly very convenient to grab, throw in my pants. I have an extra mag. I can do reloads in class, whatever it is. It was just super convenient. But it doesn't like I traded the convenience for slightly better concealment out of another rig, like my standalone holster that I can do wedges and stuff, and it doesn't interfere with the mag carrier. It definitely doesn't conceal as well as my Enigma does, but for my context for the last several years, it's made sense, right? So I think that's important to note also.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too. We already kind of touched on this, but like your context changes, right, throughout the course of your life. So when my husband was carrying in the Axis Slim, like that was kind of his first like serious holster that he like committed to for a longer period of time. And he was happy with his concealment at the time, but he also he'd never experienced anything different, right? Like he'd never experienced a higher level of concealment. And so he was working off of what he had experience with and what he knew. And I don't think that he made any changes to his until like I was already carrying in an Enigma. And over the course of his kind of concealed carry experience, he started out carrying a Glock 34 with a light and a spare mag. And he's not like a huge person, so that's a pretty big setup. And that got kind of exhausting over a period of time. He went down to a Glock 19, and then I think last year he went down to a SIG P365 XL. And that's been a really interesting experience to watch from my perspective. because when he was carrying a larger gun, it was, he'd come home from carrying that and it would be the first thing he took off. But now that he's, carrying a SIG P365XL, he's carrying that in a standard Enigma with a pro holster, sport belt, paracord leg leash. But that it just stays on him. Like it's on first thing in the morning. He works in a highly permissive environment. He works for Langdon Tactical, and he keeps his gun on all day while he's at work, and when he comes home, and it's not uncomfortable for him. It's not too much gun for him, and so it's with him all the time because it's not cumbersome for him to keep on him. And that's been my experience too, where I was carrying a Glock 48 after I carried my Glock 42, and the Glock 48 on my frame is it's with an optic on it is 67% of my hip to hip distance. And I get that calculation from this thing called the concealment percentage principle, which is something that like we all kind of knew existed, but my husband and I were kind of the first people, as far as I know, to put these calculations to paper and put a name on it and put it out there.
Yeah. So tell us how that works. Because this is interesting.
Yeah, the concealment percentage principle is something that I kind of started noticing because we were both carrying the same gun-ish. I was carrying a Glock 48 and he was carrying a Glock 19, which they're the same dimensions, just the 48's a little bit thinner.
Yep.
But we're very different size people. He is 180 pounds and 5'10", I think. And I'm 100 pounds and 5 feet tall. So we're very different size people, but carrying very similar size guns. And I realized like, wow, this is like way easier for you. So let's do some calculations. So the measurements that you take is your hip to hip distance in inches. So just, feel for your hip bones, measure that. And then the measurement you want to get on your gun is the height from the top of your optic to the bottom of the base plate of your magazine. And then you divide those into each other, and that spits out a percentage. And that's the amount of space on the front of your body that the gun is occupying. And basically like the kind of sweeping recommendations, and John and Sarah helped kind of provide some more context for these percentages. John and Sarah Filster, if the gun is lower than 40% of your hip to hip distance, then you're going to have a pretty okay time concealing it. Like that is a reasonable percentage. And you'll be able to conceal that with pretty minimal effort. And as so long as you're using like a generally good holster, like you probably have a concealment wing on there, you're probably using a belt, like generally doing things okay. Once you get into the 50% range though, like you're really starting to encounter some challenges, and you're having to really apply yourself to the concealment process. You're having to understand how to dress around that gun a little bit. You're having to understand how concealment mechanics actually work, and you will have had to absolutely identify your concealment sweet spot. Once you get beyond 50%, you are living your life on hard mode. Like you are having to not only completely understand concealment mechanics and how they work with your body, but you will also have to like very much dress around the gun. You'll have to make very specific wardrobe decisions to hide that gun. So for me to be carrying a gun that's 67% of my concealment percentage, like that is a giant gun. The equivalent on him was him carrying like a Glock 34. So generally average size male carrying Glock 34 is the same thing as me carrying Glock 48.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. So quick question on that, because I've heard you talk about this before. I have not actually measured my setup, which I'm curious to do now. So the hip to hip, like, is it like the hip bone to hip bone, I imagine?
Yes.
And then does that take into consideration like the actual like front circumference of your waist as well? Yes. So if you're a slimmer person, it's going to be shorter than if you're a heavier person. Okay. Yes. Yeah. Very interesting. So I'm 5'11" and I'm 245. So I'm not a small person, but I'm definitely like, I'm definitely not a slim person. And I carry a 5-inch M&P with an optic. So like it's a pretty beefy setup, right? Yeah. But I've experienced a lot of what you were saying, and I think it's a good point to make, that to even for me, and I would be curious to see what the percentage of this is on me, because I think it would be lower than it would be on like maybe even like Justin, who's slimmer than I am. But what was it? I'm trying to figure out how to say this. I have had to make very conscious sacrifices to carry a gun like this, to carry this gun. So I used to carry a compact M&P 2.0, which is Justin's current carry gun. It's the exact same dimensions as a Glock 19. Like, it's Smith's exact version of that, right? And I used to carry that. I carried it really well. That's where I kind of learned how to conceal. And then as I got better and my context changed at the same time, I got better at concealing, and I started being in an environment where it didn't matter as much, like nobody was going to fire me or anything like that. I started upping to carry my full-size range gun that I was teaching and competing with. I was like, I love that this is the same thing. I literally could take it out of my holster. Back when I owned like only 2 guns, I would take it out of my holster and I would take the light off and I would stick it in my USPSA competition belt and I would shoot a match. Right. And that was so cool to me. I love that. But I also understood that upping the size of the gun for me was absolutely a sacrifice in terms of specifically comfort. Because I wasn't really willing to give up very much concealment. Right. Like I think I conceal my gun about as well as you can with a traditional holster, traditional belt. And I 100% give up comfort. Like, if I wear my gun inside the waistband all day, when I come home, that is the first thing I take off. I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Right. Like, because I've got hot spots on my back, and there's other belts and things that I've tried that are more comfortable now. But it's absolutely a thing. And that's what I tell people when they ask me what I carry, and I pull this out and they're like, holy crap. Right. And I'm like, I want you to understand, this is my choice to carry this. Right. Like, I choose to carry this whole thing and I sacrifice some comfort. You do not have to make the same choice. Right. But at the same time, it's also kind of all I know. Like, I've only carried a compact and a full size. I've never even carried anything like a Shield or a 365 or a 43 or anything like that. Never even tried it. So I know that it would probably change my life in terms of comfort, but so far that's not been an attractive enough trade-off for me, who I have close to 200,000 rounds through this platform. And it's like, I'm so comfortable with this. I love shooting these guns, and it gives me a lot of confidence to carry it as well. And that's the trade-off I've made. And I think there's always going to be trade-offs, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I would imagine your husband, does he compete with a 34 or used to?
He used to, that he competed with a 34 for I think 8 years or something like that. But he's shooting the PX4 now.
Okay, very nice. But he probably shot the 34 extremely well and was probably the most comfortable shooting gun that he owned, right? I know your USPSA gun is not your carry gun either, right?
It used to be, but it's not anymore,
Yeah, so the bigger guns, like, they shoot better. And so if you're going to try to carry that, then that's great. Like, more power to you. But just understand that there's definitely going to be a trade-off, and you're definitely not going to shoot your tiny gun as well. But probably good enough, right? For what we're asking you to do. And then that's the other thing. That's another thing that I think people are hesitant to admit, that the defensive shooting the type of defensive shooting you will likely find yourself in is going to be a much less complex or difficult shooting scenario than like shooting a major match. Like, that's a lot more shooting that you have to do, right? And so you can probably handle it with another tool extremely well, right?
Right. Yes.
And under that advice, I would be carrying a smaller gun. But yeah, I think it's an interesting topic for sure.
Yeah. Well, so like I'm coming from the experience of carrying a subcompact gun and a full size gun and a compact gun. So I have jumped around a lot. I've been carrying since 2017, 2018, I think. And yeah, I've carried everything from a CZP-10C to a Glock 43X, a Glock 17, and now landing on a Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 compact. And So I'm pretty familiar with those trade-offs, and like obviously you have to figure that out for yourself, but like you have to be really honest with the discrepancies that you're going to have, or
Yes.
disparities I should say, between a smaller gun like a 43X and then like a Glock 17. And so like for me personally, you know carrying a Glock 43X and then going to like a Glock 17, because of the keel effect, which we can talk about in a little bit. My concealment like almost didn't change at all going
Yeah.
from a tiny gun to a huge gun, but like
Yeah.
my skill level and my comfort level, my shooting ability was just, it
Right.
just skyrocketed from there. Right. But then landing on like a compact size gun, it's kind of like the perfect blend of both worlds for me
Yeah.
personally. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a journey for sure. But as long as you're honest about like those trade-offs, Brennan, like you were saying,
Yeah.
it's a good starting point.
And even for someone who's at the level that you are, Justin, masterclass USPSA shooter, extremely talented shooter, can run a gun about as fast as anybody I know, right? Like you very clearly notice a performance difference when you shoot your compact versus when you shoot your 5-inch gun, right?
Oh,
and
100%.
It's like, but you still feel very confident carrying the smaller gun, and that's fine. But you understand, hey, there is a trade-off here.
There's a reason I don't compete with this gun.
Right. Yeah. And I think just acting like there's no trade-offs when we start talking about preferences is so stupid. Because there are, right? And
either you're lying, or you're lying to yourself, or you're just
yeah.
not good enough to know the differences yet.
There you go.
That, yes.
Yeah.
Which honestly is like, it's actually a perfect segue into a topic I'm pretty nerdy about when it comes to selecting a gun for concealed carry.
Yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but when you step into this space, in my experience, when I stepped into this space, the phrase I continued to hear over and over again was carry the largest gun you can reasonably conceal, which it sounds really good. Like, yeah, okay, carry the largest gun you can reasonably conceal. That assumes like, okay, I'm picking something I can reasonably conceal, but it's large enough that I can, hopefully shoot it pretty okay. But in practice, in my experience, that phrase kind of ends up getting dumbed down to just carry a big gun. Which can work for a lot of people. Like it can work for Brennan or Justin to like just carry a large gun. Okay, well, I'll carry a Glock 19. Like that's the gun that a lot of people start out with is a Glock 19. But when we like apply the concealment percentage principle to this, we get people that, are really skewed. We get people like myself that like a Glock 19 on me it's probably 67% of my concealment percentage, which is huge, right? But it's also more challenging for me to conceal because it's a double stack. And that's a math equation I haven't quite figured out how to do yet. But to like remove the math and just dumb it down, like a thicker gun is going to be more difficult for a thinner person to conceal. Like it just makes sense. So a Glock 19 is a ridiculous size gun for me to carry. And something that, we all kind of understand is that when you have a brand new shooter, you want to give them a gun that they're going to have success shooting, right? Like you don't want to give them a difficult gun to shoot, because not only are they going to be they're going to be extremely discouraged. And if that's their only option, they're probably not going to shoot it. So they're going to have a gun that they can't shoot well, and they're not going to practice with it because it sucks to shoot.
Right.
So you're setting them up for just like absolute failure.
So telling a new shooter to get a larger gun for their first gun, if they're going to learn how to shoot it, or it's going to be a home defense gun, still solid advice.
Right.
Or if you take a new shooter to the range, like, please, for the love of God, do not hand them a Glock 43. Like, let them shoot your Glock 17. It'll be a much better experience for them. Right. Still good advice. But when you ask them to stick it in their pants, continue.
Yes, exactly where I'm going with this. So we all understand, like, you want to give a new shooter a gun that's easy to shoot, but then they put it on their body and they encounter a whole different learning curve where, well, shoot, I can shoot this gun, but I can't keep it with me. So I'm either not going to have it, or I'm going to put it in a bag, which there are ways to carry off body safely. There are contexts where it can be really beneficial, but I highly discourage especially brand new concealed carriers from carrying off body. It requires a lot of intention. In some cases, it requires you to violate social norms
Yes.
by keeping a bag on you, where in that social environment it doesn't make sense to have a bag on you. Lots of reasons that I would highly discourage a new concealed carrier from carrying in a bag. So yeah, we're setting them up for failure by giving them a giant gun that if they can only do one gun, we have to kind of try to like figure out how to balance this out, because we have a new concealed carrier that doesn't really know how to apply concealment mechanics yet. And they very well may be in an environment where they have very serious negative outcomes for printing. So we need to set them up for concealment success. But we also need to set them up for shooting success.
Yes.
And for me, and in my experience and in my context, my first concealed carry gun was a Glock 42. And my husband kind of helped facilitate all of my, first gun selection stuff.
Yeah.
And he was carrying Glock 19, so his natural, space to take me was Glocks. And so he wanted to keep me in the 9mm category. So he's like, okay, try this Glock 43. But one of his buddies just happened to have a Glock 42. So he brought them both to the range for me to try. And much to his dismay at the time, I was like, yeah, this one shoots better. Which one is this? And he was like, that one's the 42. And the guy was like, man, didn't want me to go 380 route for a couple of reasons, right? Like there's a stigma that 380 is not enough stopping power. If you're on the podcast, I'm doing air quotes on stopping power. But there's also the fact that it's 380 and we have 9mm in our house. So we were going to have to adopt another caliber in our home, and it's also more expensive. So
yeah, it is fairly inconvenient, I will say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But he loved his wife and he let me pick my gun. Yes, absolutely. And I could shoot it better. That's the key point here, is that I shot both of those guns and I could shoot the 380 better. Yes. And so going forward,
that was with very little shooting experience, right?
I had the basics. Like I knew how to grip a gun. But I mean, yeah, I could send you videos of like the week I picked that gun. It's pretty rough.
Yeah. Okay.
So going forward from that, I did most of my like basic, learning how to shoot a gun on the Glock 42. That was my first carry gun. And we've already talked about kind of my initial experience carrying a gun. That was all with the Glock 42. And I went through that learning curve with a gun that is a reasonable size on my frame.
Yes.
I think the Glock 42 is still over 40% on my body type. I'm a small enough person that there really isn't a gun out there that is in that range for me.
Wow. That's crazy.
So yeah.
Cue all the comments of people being like, "Oh, but a Ruger LCP." I'm telling you, and then we're gonna get comments
about the Ruger LCP. I need to try that at some point.
No, you don't.
No, you don't.
No, you do not.
It's a pretty bad experience.
It's pretty bad. Continue.
Cool,
Sorry.
Cool. Glad to not have to even bother. So yeah, I did all of my initial learning on the Glock 42. Sure, it's 380, but I could shoot that gun reliably. And I could carry it reliably. And so I think there's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to gun size and caliber selection. But I think something that's really important to keep in mind is that my context is not your context.
Yes.
And so there can be things that just make sense for the situation that I'm in that don't necessarily make sense for yours. Like, I mean, unless you're really looking for a good pocket carry pistol, like, yeah, get yourself a Glock 42. They're reliable and easy to shoot. And they're small, generally easy to carry. But I guess my overall point here is that we really do have to try to strike that balance for beginners for something that is reasonably concealed, that is also shootable. And for, probably the vast majority of people, something that is a subcompact and 9mm is going to be, we're living in the golden age of subcompact and 9mm.
Yes.
Like you're going to be able to find something that's going to work for you, but you're also going to have people that are outliers. And it's important to be willing to consider their context and try to put yourself in their position so that you can recommend something that's actually a usable option for them, so that they, you know, continue shooting and they actually carry a gun. I'm fully convinced that had my husband insisted that I carry a Glock 19, I would not be, I never would have started shooting USPSA. I would have absolutely stopped carrying a gun very quickly. And maybe I would have continued going to the range with him. Like I could shoot it pretty okay. So yeah, I'd probably go to the range with my husband occasionally, but
Sure.
my whole life revolves around guns now. And it wouldn't have had I not had a good, solid first carry pistol that I could actually include in my life.
Yeah. That's very cool. I think that's a good lesson for a lot of people to keep in mind. Like it is not hard to scare people away from the stuff that we do. Like it is not hard. An accident, an embarrassing situation, it can be just being very uncomfortable for one day only. Like, I mean, it cannot, doesn't take much to scare people away and just have them reason back to, I've lived this long without carrying a gun. Like I can probably continue to do that. I've got one in my house. That's great. And just kind of leave it at that. And so I think the thing with carrying the biggest gun you can conceal or reasonably conceal, and I'm gonna fault a lot of my friends and the career path that I'm in as a firearms instructor, but I think a lot of that comes from like a shooting perspective, because when someone shows up to like Justin, like our 2-day performance pistol class, like that's 1,000 round count 2-day class. And first of all, I would tell a new shooter, please don't come to that class, come to a different one first. But if they did show up and maybe they've carried a gun for a while or whatever, and they show up with their 365, like that is going to suck for them quite a bit. Right. And I would be like, and they go, you know, and I've actually talked to some people on Instagram who've asked me about my classes and saying, hey, I'd like to bring my carry gun. What is it? It's a 365. It's a 43X or something like that. And I go, do you have anything else? And they're like, oh yeah, I have a Glock 34 with a, Howitzer comp dot on it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I would bring that because we're going to do a lot of shooting, and a lot of the stuff that you will learn will also work with the small gun, but you're going to have a better time if you shoot the bigger gun. And it's super, I stand by that. I think it's a very valid recommendation. But I think the shooters and the instructors will then start handing out concealed carry advice, which not all not all shooting instructors are or should be maybe giving out a lot of concealed carry advice, because sometimes they have very limited experience with it. But they'll be like, why do people keep showing up to my class with small guns? And so then they start handing out this information that you just shouldn't carry a small gun ever. It's like, that's not it either. Right. You don't carry a small gun ever and you make it work, but that's not the case for everybody else. And you and I actually had this conversation offline of, I think you messaged me about it. Tell like, I would like you to weigh in if you can on that whole idea of like, cause I know you've done a bunch of training classes, some high round count classes as well. Like, what does that look like? Because you've kind of committed to carrying a small gun, but small guns are even harder to shoot for small people. Right. Your USPSA gun is different than your concealed carry gun. So kind of walk us through that whole thing of as far as the differences between carrying and actually, shooting.
Yeah. So as far as like, instructors recommending that you bring a larger gun to class, and that being like, well, then you should actually just carry a large gun all the time. I have a couple of different thoughts on that. So I understand the recommendation to bring a larger gun to class for a couple of reasons, right? So you're going to have a higher round count. So you probably are you may hold the class up if you have a magazine that only has 10 rounds in it and everyone else has 17. Depending
on the class.
Right, depending on the class, absolutely, in the way that it's structured. But that may be a consideration. Maybe you might hold up the class. You might need to just buy a bunch more magazines so that you can have multiple magazines loaded. But the other part of it is that you will likely reach fatigue sooner than everyone else. And fatigue is one thing, but in a class in that type of environment, you generally want to avoid fatigue for two reasons. One, because fatigue with a gun in your hand equals stupid with a gun in your hand, and you don't want to be stupid with a gun in your hand. The other thing is that you won't be able to retain what you're trying to learn. I've taken classes where I was in a lot of pain and I don't remember the coursework. Like I didn't really take anything away from it because I was focused on something else. Something else was in my peripheral while I was trying to didn't retain. So those are two reasons that you want to avoid fatigue. But you don't necessarily have to bring your carry gun to a class, although I think it's extremely important that you do have a high level of skill with your carry gun. But just because you can't do a 1,000-round 2-day, 3-day class with your carry gun does not mean that you can't, for lack of a better way of putting it, burn someone down that needs burning in, 6, 10, 15 rounds.
Correct.
Like I can obtain this skill in this class and I can take it home and I can apply it to my carry gun, and that will potentially work more. That will be more effective for me than taking my fatiguing tiny gun to a 1,000-round class and retaining none of it. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense.
For sure.
Yes. And so again, like as soon as we start trying to make blanket statements and put the blanket over everything, things start to fall apart. Justin and I have probably bonded over disagreeing with blanket statements that other people have made probably more than anything else in our relationship, to be perfectly honest. Like I will send him something and be like, what is this statement? Like I can poke so many holes in that, but it's just that person has decided like this is a good overarching statement to make, and it falls apart very quickly with one or two examples. So I totally agree. So if you're going to carry a gun that's different from your like main training gun, you absolutely need to develop a very high level of skill with that. However, there are also a bunch of classes that are not like, I don't want to say performance based because performance matters in all contexts, but like maybe it's not so like high round count, USPSA style, kind of crazy running gun classes. Maybe that's not the greatest class for that gun and for you to run that. But like there are also classes that are very specifically designed to help you with your AIWB draw and to work on doing things like, hey, we're going to use our handheld light and then we're going to shoot one-handed. We're going to work on accessing the gun with one hand. We're going to work on, target identification and managing unknown contacts and all of these different things.
Yeah.
And like, I would definitely not recommend you show up with a battle belt to that. Right? Like, no, like take your concealed carry gun, take the gun you actually are going to shoot and get some realistic training with the gun that you're actually going to shoot and see what you're actually capable of in that context. Right. I went to a Craig Douglas ECQC class a few years back, and like it would have been absurd for me to show up with my USPSA belt, right? And like that class, I would definitely not call that a shooting class, right? There is some shooting. Like 100 rounds of shooting or something.
A highly contextual class. Yeah,
extremely contextual. And so for me, like the shooting skills, like they were there, and the live fire portion, super easy, and I was feeling really good about myself. And then we start like fighting each other, and I was like, at the end of day one, I was actually considering just going home because I was like, this is BS. I'm a really good shooter. I'm a really good protector, blah, blah, blah. I'm just getting beat up by people who do jujitsu, right? Yeah, exactly. I did not go home. I stayed, and it was a very life-changing class. But that's that type of context. Like it would be absurd to show up with something that you don't carry. You're just, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Like go learn. Well, hypothetically or metaphorically, but like go learn with the stuff that you carry and understand what you can do with it. And that's such a good application for it. But the blanket statement doesn't work.
Something I'll say is that my big gun is my Glock 48. I have all of the classes, all of the professional like classes that I have taken, or formal classes I've taken, I should say, have been with my Glock 48. Like that's my like big gun that I bring.
Yeah.
So I showed up to Steve Anderson's 2-day class with a Glock 48. I showed up to Tim Herron's 2-day class with a Glock 48. And I remember walking into Steve Anderson's class, and you know everyone's in their USPSA stuff, like duh. And I walk into class and we're getting ready to start, and he's like, "Are you gonna put a gun on?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I already have it on." I showed up to Steve Anderson's class with a Enigma Express and Glock 48, and the most like the best part of that was one, like having Steve be like, okay, I guess that's just going to be how it is then. But then like getting into the actual coursework and him like being like, wow, you can actually like, you can actually do this class with this gun. Like you're drawing at the like comparable speeds to what these other people are drawing from their outside the waistband holsters. I'm running the gun just fine. I am getting fatigued a little bit faster than everybody else, but
sure.
I'm keeping up. So I wouldn't say that you can't show up to, I mean, Steve Anderson's class is not a high round count, and neither is Tim's. Like it's probably in like the 600 to 800 ish range. Like we're not getting into 1,000, 1,200, anything like that.
Sure.
But I was able to keep up in those classes being the little person that I am. And so I would actually say that like, if you're my size and up, you can probably show up to one of those classes with a carry gun, so long as it's not, you know, a Glock 42 or something that's like like a micro gun. Probably not realistic to show up with a micro gun, but you know, just subcompact.
Bring enough mags.
Yeah, please. You're like Brennan's like, okay, I don't want you to show up to my class with this gun. You can go to Steve Anderson's class, but not mine.
Yeah, go train with Steve and Tim. I know those guys. They'll be fine with it. No, I think that's a good perspective though. I really do. I had a guy asking me about coming to Performance Pistol, with his concealed carry gun. I said, if you really want to do that, just make sure you bring enough mags.
Yeah.
So make sure you can carry like 40 to 50 rounds on you. Yeah. Like at least. Yep. And
that's actually the only reason that I had Shield Arms mags, was specifically for taking classes with, so that I had, you know, a 20 round extended magazine.
Yeah.
And, you know, 15. So
yeah, that's extremely helpful. It's funny. I will show up to a class with about 25 140 mil mags, so like 23 to 25 round mags, and I'll just show up with 25 loaded, and I don't load until the evening.
Awesome.
And then overnight I load my mags and I show back up the next morning and I don't load mags. It's delightful.
Just casually has like $1,500 worth of magazines.
Well, you know,
in his range bag.
Over time.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So anything else that we should touch on as far as like choosing the right gun versus kind of little versus big? Maybe we talk a little bit about like what to look for in a carry gun specifically. I know what I look for. Does anything change as far as that? Anything that you like specifically steer people towards? I know you kind of talked about the size, but anything else?
Yeah, I would say like in summary, like picking a concealed carry gun, I recommend starting with the path I generally recommend people take is they get their concealment percentage. Like any gun that they're considering. A lot of people are considering like a subcompact or whatever they're considering. Glock 19, something M&P, something SIG, something Taurus, like whatever you're considering. You know, get your concealment percentage with it. Go shoot the ones that are within a reasonable concealment percentage for you. See how that goes. If that's, you know, not going to be reasonable for you to shoot, maybe just know that you're going up in concealment percentage. It's going to be more difficult for you to conceal, but maybe you're going to take that compromise and you're going to, you know, really dig into how to conceal it. And you're going to choose something maybe that's a little bit bigger that you enjoy shooting more. But I do recommend, if you're going to carry it, understanding how difficult or how easy it will be for you to conceal. And And then once you've narrowed it down to 2, 3, maybe even 4 options that you're like generally happy with, I would recommend looking into holsters and ensuring that whatever holster you think you might want, that maker actually makes a holster for your gun.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many people have messaged me and said they went to the gun store, they picked the thing that gave them that spiritual experience in their hand, and then they bought it and realized that nobody makes a holster for it. Like if you don't know, like that's a thing that nobody will make a holster for it, or nobody that's making a quality holster is making a holster for it. And another caveat I'll throw out there is that once you start adding accessories to your gun, like weapon mounted lights, lasers, or aftermarket grip modules, or even red dots, you start really narrowing down your holster options. If there's a holster maker not making holsters for red dots at this point, they're completely obsolete. So that's not really a problem.
True.
But
the weapon mounted light thing is a big problem though.
Yes.
Sure.
So if you're going to do like an X300 or a TLR1, then you'll have no problem finding a holster. You might have a hard time concealing it, but you won't have any difficulty finding a holster at all.
Sure.
Once you start doing like a TLR7A or whatever that teeny tiny TLR one is,
6.
that's sure. Yeah, TLR6. Once you start doing those smaller weapon mounted lights, that's when you really start running into holster compatibility issues. So that's something to consider too. Like, okay, am I going to prioritize a light on my gun and potentially sacrifice some comfort and concealment? Or maybe am I going to, for now at least, forgo the weapon mounted light and adopt only handheld? And one more caveat I'll throw out there is that if you are of the mind that you're going to have a weapon mounted light instead of a handheld, you're objectively wrong. Those
Correct.
are not the same tool. They're not used for the same context. Handheld light they're totally different tools. So I know you guys know that, but I'm just throwing that out there for people listening.
You could point a handheld light at anybody or anything you want. You cannot point a weapon mounted light at anybody or anything you want because it is attached to a gun, and the muzzle will also be covering that.
And that is a felony.
Correct.
In all 50
and
states.
that, my friends, is a felony.
Correct. Also, other people can shoot you if you do that to them. So there's that.
Right. And you have a whole nother problem. So
correct. Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, those are just like some general things to consider that, you might start running into holster compatibility issues. So I generally recommend people take that route where they find a couple of guns that are interesting to them. They get their concealment percentage with those guns. They shoot those guns, narrow it down that way, and then find the holster they think, or 2 or 3 holsters. They're like, okay, these are going to be the holsters that I think are going to work best with my body. And then see if those holster makers are making holsters for your gun. And you'll probably, with just doing that route, you'll probably narrow it down to 1 or 2 guns. And then you can just kind of decide from there.
I love that. Last question I have on that. And it was a question I just thought of. So would you ever recommend, let's say we've got somebody who is like brand new to shooting, has never shot a handgun, wants to get into shooting because they want to conceal carry. Do you think there is, in your opinion, is there any benefit to them maybe learning how to shoot or taking some lessons with a easier to shoot firearm than the one that they're going to end up carrying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I like I said, I did all of my formal firearms training with a Glock 48. I did like my basics that my husband taught me with my Glock 42, but all of my formal firearms training was with the Glock 48. And I've since, gone down to carrying a P365. So I personally am carrying a smaller gun than what I learned on, but my there is some degradation of skill, but that gap gets smaller and smaller week by week as I shoot it more and get more confident with it. And as a matter of fact, an even kind of bigger difference is my competition gun has been a Glock, not Glock, has been a Walther Q5, and now it's a Walther PDP in steel frame.
Nice.
And my carry gun is a P365.
Huge difference.
Yeah, huge difference. But after having done multiple matches, I have not done that much competition. I've probably like accumulatively done like 15 matches. But after taking that gun and competing and seriously applying myself to competition, I am way, way more capable with my carry gun. And I have even been surprised when I go to validate, those skills with my carry gun. I have even been surprised, like, oh, I have gained skills with my carry gun by simply applying myself to this other gun that's like twice the weight and size.
Yeah. I've seen that from a few friends of mine who like will exclusively shoot a full size gun, and then they get a smaller gun to try out to carry, and they're like, guys, this thing kind of rips. I'm like, no, you rip. Like you're a really high level shooter. You're very good at shooting. And so you put something small in your hands and it's like, you immediately know, oh yeah, grip is more important, but like you can probably crush the gun and you can probably like manage it really well. So the skill level that you're building will absolutely transfer back. And so maybe for the people who are listening, like, don't be afraid to try some bigger stuff in shooting. Maybe you learn how to shoot on a bigger gun just to take away some of the craziness that is learning how to shoot. And then at the same time, you're exploring some smaller options to carry, understanding you're going to need to also practice with that. I used to teach a lot of beginner shooters, like never touched a gun before shooters. And we started on a like Glock 17 size gun. Right. And it was like, we're going to learn how to load magazines. The magazines are easier to load. The gun is easier to load. The slide is easier to rack. We started them with a red dot and all of these things. And it was a very, very good experience for people. And then after that, they're like, okay, well, I clearly can't carry this gun. So what should I look into? And it's like, yeah, let's help you out with that. Right. Cool. I really like that. That's very good. Before we get to some listener questions, is there anything that we missed as far as kind of any main topics?
Not that are coming to mind for me. How about you, Justin?
No, I think we got some good stuff. I think we could make this another 2.5 hours long, but
we could. Yeah.
We all nerd out about this kind of stuff. But
oh yeah, it's fun to talk about like gear and I mean, concealed carry is a part of our everyday lives. So it's really easy to get nerdy about it because we all three of us, and then we as a community have daily experience with it. So we all have our own thoughts and opinions and like personal experience with it. So, and it's fun to talk about for sure.
It's a very personal journey too, because a lot of it is like emotional too, right? Like you start out with like a moral like conviction of like, I have to carry a Glock 19 with an X300 and an RMR. Like it's a moral conviction. I have to do that. And then it goes into like a more emotionless decision. Like, okay, this is actually what I need to do, but this isn't actually working very well for me. And then, so it's a very personal journey. And so I think that's why, like, I think specifically this episode is gonna like reach a lot of people because it's so relatable.
One thing that I just thought of just off of what you just said is the emotional side of it. And that's something that I think is worth mentioning, is that it's actually really important to not get to try to not get terribly emotional about your gear selection. And this is something that if you spend any time on the internet in the gun space, you will encounter people that if you say something like, I don't know, what is objectively like, okay, like this type of holster objectively doesn't conceal as well as this type of holster. And that it's kind of, this type doesn't conceal as well as this type. this person that is carrying the one that doesn't conceal as well, objectively, they get emotional about that. Like they receive it as like oh, you think I'm a bad person. Like, no, like you can continue doing that. It's just know that like you can get different results with this. But I understand why you're doing this for XYZ reasons, that kind of thing. But I think it's really important to not get emotional about your gear selection and try to remain as objective as you possibly can, so that you can leave room for being wrong. Like we've all gone through that season where, and I'm sure we're all wrong about something right now, whatever it is.
Not me.
I'm sure,
Maybe
sure
you guys,
we're all wrong about something, but we all go through that season, especially when we're, brand new beginners, where we're trying to navigate so many different aspects of guns, whether it's learning how to shoot them, learning how to carry them. There's so much nuance to it, not to mention like the legal aspect of things. There's so much to navigate.
Yeah.
And if we get terribly emotional about our gear selection, we begin to cling onto it like a security blanket, and we have a hard time letting go of something, even when it's pointed out to us that it's objectively not necessarily wrong, but maybe suboptimal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the emotional side of it, because it can be like an emotional attachment to our gear. So yeah, it's important to at least attempt to remain somewhat objective if possible.
Yeah, I think it's very important to always study your context, like always, and then well, what am I carrying? And that doesn't have to just be the gun either, right? It can be the other stuff that you choose to put in the 5 pockets that you have, right? Like, okay, well, I can only fit X number of things on my body. What is going to go in my body? What is going to go in a bag? What is going to go in my vehicle? What is going to stay at home, right? And you're always having to make those decisions. And I think anybody who has like an EDC is always kind of evaluating that, right? And like my EDC changed frequently for a number of years, and then now it hasn't changed for like over 2 years, right?
Yeah, same.
And it's because like I haven't stopped evaluating it. It's just that every time I do, I go, yes, I'm very glad I have this. This is a non-negotiable. This is a convenience thing. So I'm going to keep doing that. And these are my high consequence items. If I didn't have these, then something terrible might happen. So, and I've kind of boiled it down to as little as I can, but it's still meeting those things for those kind of categories.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Super important. Okay. Very good. Well, I think this has been a really good discussion. Let's get into some listener questions because these might take a couple minutes. So, first of all, what advice would you have for specifically guys who want to get their spouses or girlfriends or significant others, whatever, into concealed carry and shooting? Because I see this a lot. I probably get this question a bunch, is like, how do I get my wife into shooting? And I'm like, bro, I don't know your wife. Right?
I've never met the woman.
Never met the woman. I'm not friends with her, blah, blah, blah. Right. But I imagine this is a question you also get quite a bit. Yes. How might someone navigate that as someone whose spouse actually did get them into shooting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say is how not to do it. So the way you don't do it is by scaring them. And I seriously, like, I hate that I have to say it, but I think that's a very common way of, whether it's your spouse or your girlfriend or even just like a buddy, there's this attempt to scare them into doing it. Like, if you don't do this, then something bad is going to happen to you. And although there may be some truth to that, that's not the way to communicate that, especially, I mean, with any human, but especially with somebody that you really, really care about, like your spouse or your girlfriend. And the way that I recommend that people go about it is with a lot of humility, first of all. Second of all, you need to lead by example. If you're not showing her what it looks like to carry a gun, if you're not doing that safely or responsibly, she can perceive that in one way or another. If you're not doing it on a somewhat regular basis, she's not seeing you put your gun on in the morning, and put it in the safe at night, or she doesn't hear your you're clicking your dry fire in the other room. She's not seeing that being a part of your life. So leading by example, absolutely first and foremost. And second is just being encouraging in that, instead of forceful. A lot of the times I'll hear it approached like, sorry, I'm getting distracted because I hear my dog barking. A lot of the times I'll hear it approach like, I want you to go to the range with me, or I just want you to start carrying a gun. I'm worried about your safety, which is totally valid. Absolutely.
Sure.
But I think a better way to approach it is, again, especially with a spouse, is like, I love you so much, and I want you to be a part of my life as long as I'm here. And I want you to be safe, and I want you to come home every day. I want to know that you are able to protect our kids, all of those things. Approaching it from a place of like, I genuinely love you and I want you to be okay.
Yeah.
And not being forceful about it,
Yeah.
Don't put a gun in your wife's purse.
Please do not do that.
Please don't put a gun in your wife's purse. Maybe consider offering, having her go to a class that is ladies only. But ensuring that you find a good instructor that's putting on a class like that, or even a private. I actually generally don't recommend that you try to teach your wife how to shoot. That for some reason, the Lord blessed us, and that worked well for my husband and I for a period of time. But generally, when you try to teach your spouse how to shoot, there's a lot more implications that come with what you're saying. So you're trying to tell her, like, grip the gun harder. And she is, she's thinking about the disagreement you had on the way over to the range. And she's like, you're being harsh with me. Well, you're not being harsh. You're just trying to teach her something, and the way that your tone is coming across a certain type of way. And that kind of thing is not implied when you're generally being taught by a professional. Like, I'm not going to assume that my firearms instructor is having a tone with me, but I might hear that coming from my spouse, whether it's there or not. Does that make sense? Like,
100%.
You don't want to have that emotional, generally you don't want to have that emotional attachment to somebody who's teaching you how to shoot a gun. So those are kind of my general thoughts and recommendations. Is don't be forceful about it. Lead by example, be humble, and approach it from a place of, I love you and I want you to be okay and I want you to be around. And I think that this tool is a way that can facilitate that. But if you're uncomfortable with it, then there's a lot of other things that you can do besides carrying a gun. You can encourage your wife to learn about situational awareness. You can teach her that passively by doing that yourself. You can also encourage her to carry something like pepper spray. I highly recommend that people carry pepper spray, whether they're carrying a gun or not. As Chuck Haggard would say, it is a tool that you can use between a harsh word and a gun. And it is essentially a way that you can poke someone in the eyes from somewhat of a distance. So there are other steps that you can take between carrying a gun and not having any tools on you at all. A flashlight, for goodness sakes. She doesn't need any training to carry a flashlight. She's walking around a parking lot. She can turn on her flashlight as she's walking to her car. She can look inside of her vehicle before she even approaches it with a flashlight. If somebody's walking towards her and they're doing so in a way that seems threatening, she can shine a light in their eyes, and speak to them verbally. There's so many other things she can do besides carry a gun if she's uncomfortable with that. So, those are my general recommendations for talking to your wife about carrying a gun.
What do you think about people kind of gradually getting into carry? So I know a lot of people, like, they'll get into shooting first, and then but it seems fairly rare for somebody to just jump into, like, now I carry a gun with me, like, 24/7 everywhere I go, every single time I leave the house, blah blah blah, right? I have made that decision. Like, today I was taking my dog to the park. I was wearing sweatpants. I was like, I'm literally going like 2 minutes away from my house. I can walk home. I was like, and then I was like, no, I'm going to go get it. And so I grab my gun, and I always end up making that decision, but not everybody does. And not everybody feels the need to, and that's fine. Do you feel like there's a way for people to slowly start incorporating the carry thing into their life? Or do you feel like, no, like just commit, carry it all the time? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's kind of hard. I think it's really individual, and it kind of depends on your lifestyle. That initial like navigating when and how often to carry a gun is really difficult. And you may have kind of parts of your day where having a gun with you doesn't really make sense. For example, when I first started carrying a gun in that first like 2 years, I also started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But I also worked from home. So I chose to not, I intentionally chose to not bring my gun with me to jiu-jitsu, because I felt that my risk of having that gun stolen was higher than me actually needing it.
Sure.
Whether it was like stolen from my vehicle or stolen from my backpack at the gym.
Sure.
So, you might have contexts and like parts of your day where you actually, maybe I don't actually need to bring it with me. Maybe my risk of something else that's a different negative outcome, like could increase. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But in terms of like how to get comfortable having a gun on you every day, going from not having a gun on you every day, I think for some people it's actually really scary to first navigate that. And I actually highly recommend that anyone who carries a gun also has some type of inert version of their gun, whether it's a blue gun or a SIRT pistol, something that is just completely inert. There's a couple of reasons for that. I won't go into all the details for why to have an inert version of your gun, but it's a very useful tool, especially if like you're wanting to just practice draws. You're not trying to get trigger presses in. You're not doing anything like that. You're just trying to get your gun out of the holster and get your sights lined up, use your optic or something. Having an inert version of your gun keeps you from having to administratively handle your actual carry gun multiple times a day, every single day, to do dry fire. So that's one reason that I recommend having a blue gun. But if you're just getting into concealed carry and it's kind of scary at first, that's an area where you can have a blue gun. You can put that on and carry that around the house. I don't necessarily think that it's a good idea to carry a blue gun outside the house as you get comfortable with it. I don't know that I can articulate intelligently or clearly why I don't necessarily think that's a good idea. I wouldn't say absolutely not, but generally I don't think that it's a good idea to bring an inert gun into the public space. But it's having it's a little weird, and I don't know. I just think that you could potentially be dumb. I think you could do something dumb, and I won't get into what the dumb things are. But you could get dumb with that. But I think that it could be valuable at first as you're getting comfortable, and even as you're navigating concealment and stuff, customizing your holster, your prosthetic, all that. Having a blue gun to carry around the house, or just having your unloaded gun with like a barrel block. You can literally Google barrel block or Amazon barrel block. Order one of those. They're like $10 or something. Put a barrel block in your actual gun and carry that around the house. Get comfortable like carrying it at first, and then take it on like a grocery run, or what's another like regular everyday thing that people do, like go get gas with it, like do something that's like a short trip and experience that. And you very well might encounter limits of your gear doing just that. Like, if you're not using a great holster, you might, take it, you might get in the car and sit down and realize like, oh, this is extremely uncomfortable. Or you might like, your dog might get out of your house and you have to chase your dog down the street, and you realize that your sticky holster will drop your gun when you're running. Like that kind of thing. So those are kind of my general thoughts on getting comfortable carrying a gun, but definitely not a comprehensive list.
Yeah. Cool. I think that's great. Justin, I know you had a question. Right.
Yeah. So we don't have to dive too deep into this, but I'm curious, for anyone that has been following us for any length of time, we're big fans of competitive shooting. And Tessa, I know you've gotten into that as well. Just it said you shot 15 matches, which is a good amount. I'm curious, what was the thought process getting into competitive shooting? With your perspective being your priority being concealed carry, maybe more of a defensive mindset. Like, what was the push for you, or that decision? What made you decide to, hey, I want to go shoot a match?
So this is not gonna be the answer you're expecting. So like I said before, my husband and I got married. He was a competitive shooter. He shot for the pistol team at his school, and that was a huge part of his life. For 4 years, he was shooting, every single day, all 4 years. And then prior to that, he was doing USPSA. So I married the guy knowing that this was a really big deal and a really big part of his life and even his personality. And the last thing, going into our marriage, the last thing I ever wanted to do was hinder that part of him to be that wife that's like, don't go do the thing you love to do because XYZ. And one thing that I kind of started noticing was that he would want to go to the range, or want to go to a match, and I wouldn't want to go. And so he wouldn't go because he wanted to be with me. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to these matches. So I just started going and watching. And sure enough, one day this older gentleman, probably in his 70s, he was a GM. He walks up to me and he's like, "What are you doing? Why are you not shooting?" And I was like, "I'm here with that guy. Like, I'm not doing the thing." And he was like, "Well, next time, bring a gun. You're going to do the thing." And gave me a lot of encouragement. And it for whatever reason, I heard that from him. And so I started doing matches because I wanted to support my husband in that hobby. My first match, I did terrible. I don't think I even finished one of the stages. And then I didn't compete in another match for a year after that because it was so humbling.
Yeah.
And then I took I think I'd taken 1 or 2 shooting classes between my 2 matches. And so I was able to actually finish the match, my second one. And then it was probably another 6 months. And then I started getting into it a lot more consistently because I knew I should. It was like eating broccoli. It was like eating my vegetables. I knew I should do it. I knew that it was going to help me shoot better. But the primary thing was I wanted to be able to think with a gun in my hand. And I felt that the best way for me to build automaticity with my gun and also with my feet and my just overall body mechanics was to subject myself to competition. And it has done exactly that. I'm a little B class shooter, but I can think a lot more with a gun in my hand, even in competition. A lot of the shooting stuff is and gun handling stuff, it's a lot more automatic now. And that's beneficial, sure, on the range and in competition. But really the place where it's most beneficial is, the day that I hope never comes, the day that maybe I have to actually use my gun to defend myself. I want all of the getting the gun out of the holster, the clearing my garment. I want all of the pulling the trigger, the stopping pulling the trigger, the averting my muzzle. I want all of that stuff to be without thought. I want to have to not apply my brain to any of those movements so that I can apply my brain to whatever the horrible problem in front of me is. So, doing competitive shooting as somebody who really approached this entire thing strictly from a competitive mindset, it's been the single most helpful tool for honestly becoming a better self-defender. I highly recommend it for anyone, whether you're terrified of it or not. Please get yourself into a match. You'll be extremely humbled the first couple of times, but it will not take long for you to start seeing extreme changes in your shooting ability and your ability to think with a gun in your hand.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean that's the gospel, you know, we're going to preach till the end of time. I mean that's
Right.
I mean that's literally that's the answer. Everything you just said, I don't even really need to add anything to it.
And that is the exact reason that both Justin and I got into competition. It's the exact reason that we still shoot competition.
Yeah.
There is an element that I really enjoy that's like part of the game and the sport, and I enjoy that. But if you told me, hey, you've got to give up concealed carrying or USPSA, I would walk away from USPSA, and I would not be hurt at all about that. That would be okay, fine, right? And I've gotten so much better at shooting than I ever could have imagined if I had not gotten into it. So I think we're actually competing in matches for the exact same reason. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be your goal to become a national champion. That is not for everybody. You do not even have to make GM or masterclass or whatever, right? It's just, there is something there to learn for everybody. So that's fantastic.
Love it.
Okay, a couple more. So you've taken a bunch of training classes. I know I've seen you reference taking Steve Anderson's class, Tim Herron's class. I know you've trained with John Johnston, some other people. What's been your favorite class so far? And what is a class that you would recommend to somebody who is kind of diving down this rabbit hole of carrying a gun?
Wow.
Deep breath.
Yeah. Honestly, the class that comes to mind is Tim Herron's pistol performance class.
Okay.
And that's for a couple of reasons. Honestly, one of the things that's really stood out to me over, all of these classes, they're all completely different classes. Some of them are competitive based. Most of them are like contextual. Some of them like don't even include guns. But Tim's class really stood out to me because of who he is. And that's something that I have noticed throughout all of these classes is that the person teaching it makes all the difference in how the coursework is communicated and how it's retained and what the overall experience in the class is. If your instructor doesn't know how to instruct, or if your instructor is distracted with personal problems or whatever, like they're focused on something other than the task at hand, like it completely changes the experience. So Tim is a great instructor. Like just objectively, he can teach people well. But something that stands out about Tim is that he actually loves his job. Like he genuinely loves to teach people this very thing. And it's a big part of what makes him outstanding at it. And it's a big part of what makes his classes so fun. I learned about shot calling for the first time in Tim's class. I'd been taught like how to grip a gun, like I could generally grip a gun when I showed up to his class.
Sure.
But he provided me with more nuances to gripping the gun, in terms of pressure, and like strong hand placement. But actually one of the reasons that I think his class was the second class I ever took. And it was because, the other instructor that I took class with recommended I go take a class with Tim Herron, because if you've never met Tim Herron, and sorry, Tim, if you're listening to this, but he's a smaller dude. He's a little bit of a smaller guy. And that's why somebody recommended I go take class with him, because I am a smaller human. Tim is a large person in comparison to me, but still he's one of the smaller male instructors that I could go take class with. Yes. That's also teaching really good coursework. And so he actually gave me a pretty high contrast to what I had been taught previously in terms of stance. And basically what I had been taught was like, get a like sumo wrestler, like wide base, because I'm so small. Like this person wasn't saying everyone needs to stand like this. They were saying you need to stand like this because you're a small person and you need to apply everything you have to this gun to get even where everyone else is starting. And so taking that class with Tim was really funny. We were shooting out at like 25 yards. It was kind of like throttle control, but it was also shot calling at the same time. And so one of the ways he does shot calling is he puts the target out so far that you can't physically see where you were shooting, where your hits actually were. So we're shooting out at like 25 yards. and I get all like nice and like low with a really wide base, and I like tense up my like back muscles and like really engage everything to try to just like own this gun. And Tim comes over to me and he's like, "Hey, chill out. Like, calm down. Loosen up." And he made me stand with my feet together and like loose to like totally exaggerate like the opposite side of it. And he was like, "Did you still get acceptable results standing that way?" I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Cool. Now find something in the middle." So yeah, taking that class with Tim actually was really foundational for me. And I haven't taken class with him since like 2021. So I need to take another class with him to like, okay, do a refresh. But Tim was really foundational for me. His coursework is a lot of fun. He makes it a lot of fun. There's like man-on-man competition. But he's also just a good person and instructor himself. So yeah, Tim Heron. Go take class, Tim Heron.
That's very cool. I've followed Tim forever, and have said for many years, I'm like, oh yeah, I want to go take a class with Tim, and I finally did it this year. So I signed up for one of his classes in June. So I'll be.
No way. Where is it?
In Pennsylvania.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
So I'm gonna go try to give him a hard time for 2 days. So I'm looking forward to it. That's gonna be awesome. He's a great guy. He's one of the people who, like, from the very beginning, when like I didn't know anything about shooting, would like message me about shooting stuff and like help educate me and have like conversations in a non-condescending, "you idiot, you don't know anything" type of way. It was very much like very supportive. And then I learned like actually how skilled he is as a shooter. And then that was honestly what sold me on his class, was him just taking the time to message me and help inform me on some stuff that I was like, oh yeah, wow, that's a really good perspective. And as I grew as a shooter, I found that, oh yep, that thing that Tim Heron talked about that one time is true. Yep. And it makes you want to hang out with, interact with, take classes from the people who put information out that you benefit from for free.
Absolutely. Like, yes.
Somebody could film an entire class and they could post that on YouTube, and you watch that and go, there's a lot of good stuff in that. That should encourage you to then go pay for the exact same thing in person, not go, well, I've already got it now. It's Tim does a really good job of that. I think that's
slightly off topic, but I think that is a myth that if you post your coursework online, that people won't show up. I think it's the exact opposite. You post your coursework online and people see the value proposition in it and they come,
Yes. A long time ago, a friend of mine, Scott Jedlinski. So I was asking him about a certain instructor, and I was like, hey man, I'm interested in taking your class. I'm also interested in taking this other guy's class. And I'm kind of wondering what you would recommend for my skill level. This is a very noob question, because I was literally asking him if I should pay him or somebody else. But he had me call him, and I talked to him, and he goes, well, what do you know about my class? What do you expect to get out of it? And I listed off all these things, right? Like, oh, AIWB, red dot stuff, performance stuff. He's like, well, what about the other guy? I was like, I don't know. And he was like, I was like, I don't really know what to expect. That's why I'm asking you. And he was like, well, there's your answer right there. Right. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And to this day now, like teaching our own classes, I will encourage people, hey, video the blocks that you want to remember. If that's easier than taking notes. I don't tell people not to post it, because if you want to post it, that's fine. Like, I'll stand behind what's out there. And if you find it helpful, maybe you'll sign up for a class. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Final question. What's the future for you and kind of your personal brand and direction you're heading, and Filster or whatever? What's next for Tessa?
So for Tessa, I plan to continue uploading content on YouTube, and really like the scope of my channel is learn along with me. And that it kind of organically turned into that, because I have just kind of been learning in front of people for the last 3 years, just bringing people along for my journey. And that has resonated with people, and it's been helpful. So I just plan on continuing to do that right now. I'm starting to work with Daniel Defense a little bit. And so I'm kind of diving into long gun this year.
Very cool.
I have a 2-gun match coming up in like a little over a month, like a month and a half. But I want to get into some long gun classes. One thing that's really cool is that I feel pretty confident right now in my pistol skills. I have plenty of room to grow, but I'm confident there. And a lot of the stuff that I know there has transferred a lot to long gun. But that's kind of the plan for this year, is to explore long gun, including shotguns as well.
Nice.
And then as far as Filster, I certainly cannot tell you what is coming, but there are some really big and exciting projects underway that are I'm really stoked about them. So yeah, there's definitely some really cool stuff coming from Filster, but that's kind of
awesome.
the general what's coming in the future.
Very
fantastic. Cool. Fantastic. Well, it's cool to hear that you're getting to rifles, because that is a whole world in and of itself, which is intimidating, but also pretty rewarding and fun. And Daniel Defense is a great company to be starting to kind of dip your toe into that with. They're a cool company. So very, very cool. Well, I will certainly, we will continue to kind of watch the progression and watch the YouTube channel and all of that, which is great. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Tell people how they can find you, how they can follow you, support you, all of that.
Yeah. So, you can primarily find me on YouTube. It's just my name, Tessah Booth. Same on Instagram. It's Tessa_Booth. And then I have a website that kind of just hosts all of that, but primarily I'm on YouTube and Instagram, kind of doing the learn along with me journey.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, guys. We will, of course, as always, link everybody's content and websites and things like that in the show notes. So make sure you click on that and make sure you're following Tessa. Fantastic educational resource, and really, really good YouTube videos as well. As always, guys, you know the deal. If you want to train with us, gateway-defense.com. All of our classes that are currently on the schedule are listed there. Follow along with us on social media as well. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We try to make the channel as valuable as we possibly can for you guys. If you have any questions for Tessa, leave them in the comments. We'll be sure to get them over to her and get you answers. And until next time, guys, this has been the Gateway Defense Podcast. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep practicing shooting, and we will see you on the range.